Okay, right now we're getting some breaking news coming in on the Trump investigation and that grand jury vote that Jonathan Deans just reported about moments ago. Let's get back to our chief investigative reporter now with the breaking update on the Trump investigation. Do we have Jonathan?
Adam, 4 sources now tell us the grand jury has voted to indict former President Trump in connection with the hush money payments made to Stormy Daniels. His defense lawyers now acknowledging that they've been notified of this indictment. So the former president of the United States has been charged with a crime. We are waiting for details as to the exact charges. We're also waiting for word on to when former President Trump might be asked to appear for in court here in Lower Manhattan at 100 Center Street. We are still awaiting the formal word from the Manhattan DA's office. We can tell you that the NYPD is currently ramping up security around the courthouse and in other parts of the city as a precaution, and they have officers on standby. But again, the grand jury has voted today to charge the former president in connection with the Stormy Daniels matter, and his lawyers acknowledge that they've been notified that of the charges being filed by the grand jury. So again, the former president of the United States charged here in New York with a crime, and we are awaiting word from the Manhattan DA's office to detail further which charge or charges they decide to go forward with.
Right. So the nature of the charges still in question. We're waiting to get the answer on that one from the DA's office. But again, here's an NBC News special report as the grand jury has voted to indict former President Donald Trump.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good day from New York. NBC News has learned a New York grand jury has just voted to indict former President Donald Trump. It's the first indictment ever of a former U.S. president and could have a major impact in the 2024 race for the White House. The investigation centered on Mr. Trump's alleged role in 2016 in a hush money payment to former adult film star Stormy Daniels, who said she had an affair with Mr. Trump in 2006. That payment was made in the final days of the 2016 presidential campaign by Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump's former lawyer, who after the election was reimbursed by the Trump Organization. Joining us now is NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett. Laura, lay it out for us.
All right, Lester, obviously a seismic development here, a historic development. Never before have we seen a former president indicted in the United States of America. Now, we have not actually seen this indictment. We believe it to be still under seal there in the court in Manhattan. But we now have 3 sources confirming that the grand jury has, in fact, voted to indict. We also have 2 sources confirming that Mr. Trump's lawyers have been informed that this grand jury has voted to indict. Now, typically, the defendant gets an opportunity to surrender in a case like this. Obviously, Mr. Trump had forecasted that he would be arrested in some respect. We have no evidence that that has taken place. But the typical scenario would be for he to actually surrender at the district attorney's office. At that point, he would be processed, fingerprinted, mugshot, all of the typical processes that you would see in a regular case. Even though, of course, this is not the regular case, we do not have any timing on exactly when that processing would take place.
Now,
Lester.
the indictment itself, will it be sealed? Will we not perhaps see the details of it for some time?
It's typically sealed until a judge actually orders it to be unsealed. So it gets sealed. It's actually with the court right now.
And that would specify what the actual accusation is.
That's exactly. That's when we will actually see the piece of paper that will actually lay out all the charges. Sometimes they go into great detail. That's known as a speaking indictment, when it provides somewhat of a narrative, sort of telling the story of what happened. Sometimes it's very bare bones, and we'll have to wait and see what this one does.
We have been hearing that the legal theory, the legal basis that the DA has been looking at is one that's untested. Yes. What do we know about what the challenge was in this case?
So typically in a case like this, the falsification of business records, that's typically a misdemeanor. So we're talking just up to a year in prison. In order to elevate it, to step it up to a felony, there has to be actually a second crime, an intent to either commit or conceal a second crime. And throughout this entire investigation, we've all wondered, what would that second crime crime be? Could it be something related to state election law? Could it be something related to federal election law? We just don't know. And it's one of the things that we're going to be looking for when, in fact, this indictment gets unsealed.
So a question that essentially centers on how that money was accounted for, what it was stated to be used for, and what the intent may have been for its use.
Exactly. So it's not actually the paying of the hush money that's the crime. The problematic issue here, if in fact that's what they've indicted him on, is the way that it was accounted for on the books of the Trump organization as legal fees, when in fact it was not legal fees to Michael Cohen, his lawyer at the time. It was hush money.
Again, the former president had predicted, a week and a half ago that he would be arrested. Obviously, that has not happened right now, but we do know, again, from our sources, there has been an indictment. Let me go to senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake. Garrett, what can you tell us?
Well, Lester, picking up that timeline from a week and a half ago, after Mr. Trump's prediction a week and a half ago Saturday that he would be arrested the following Tuesday, his legal team offered a witness of their own to this grand jury, a man named Robert Costello, who had been an attorney working with Michael Cohen around the time of this alleged hush money plot. That testimony then essentially was the last moving piece we saw in this probe for another week. On Monday of this week, the grand jury heard from what we now believe was their final witness, David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer. This was Mr. Pecker's second time before the grand jury. He's a key player in all of this. He was believed to be the person who brought together Mr. Cohen and attorneys for Stormy Daniels, who might have engineered or at least come up with the idea for these payments. That witness on Monday, again, believed to be the last witness this grand jury heard before their decision to indict today, apparently 2 months to the day after being convened for the very first time on January 30th. Now, as we await additional information about what the charges might be, I can tell you the political reaction is already coming in. Congress is headed out on a 2-week recess, but already we've heard from members, and it's clear that this is going to be a polarizing decision, both in the halls of Congress and politically across the nation writ large. One Republican member of Congress calling it a dark day for the country. Some Democrats cheering this on as a victory for the rule of law. Again, Lester, so much we don't know, but the political reverberations into 2024, the presidential election campaign, will be vast.
Well, of course, he has a presumption of innocence for now. Does that change anything in terms of him being a candidate for the 2024 election?
The former president's made it clear an indictment will not change his candidacy. He will plow through it. In fact, he has made the possibility of an indictment almost a plank of his campaign platform, arguing that any indictment in New York or in any of the other investigations in which we know him to be a target would be, in his words, election interference, an effort, he says, by Democratic district attorneys or prosecutors with the Justice Department to do what a political process couldn't and knock him out of this race. He has been very clear on that point, that he believes this is a political indictment, should one come, or should any additional indictments come, and he fully intends to continue his campaign in the face of any additional legal challenges.
All right, Garrett, I'll ask you to stand by. I want to go on the phone now. NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos is joining us. Danny, as we understand, this would be unsealed at a later date in which we would learn the details of the indictment. But would it be your best estimate that this would be a felony indictment?
I think most folks are predicting that this will be a felony indictment based on falsification of business records, which is a default misdemeanor in New York State, but it gets bumped up to a felony if the falsification of records was used in furtherance of or to conceal another crime. But I may be in the minority of folks that are thinking that that may be what's on the indictment, but also look out for the crimes related to Trump allegedly inflating his value for the purpose of securing loans or just bragging rights, and deflating his value of properties when it came time to paying taxes. That, to me, still seems like a viable set of charges that could appear on the indictment, even though reportedly there's been a lot of attention by the grand jury on the Stormy Daniels hush money payments.
This is where it gets a bit sticky here. My understanding is grand juries are secretive, that the information is close held. The fact that we know what we know now, does it affect the defense? If they know, for example, that Alvin Bragg had to push this rock uphill for a ways to get this indictment, what does that signal to the defense?
Exactly right. While we may not know what went on exactly in the grand jury room, we have the benefit of, for example, Mark Pomerantz, a former volunteer member of the DA's office of New York, who wrote essentially a tell-all book that gave us a pretty good idea of what the push and pull was behind closed doors, not in the grand jury room itself, but among prosecutors in the DA's office. So I think that you might find that that's the kind of book that not only made the case for indicting Trump, but at the same time, it also, by giving the other side of the coin, the other prosecutors and their arguments, gave the defense a blueprint for how to proceed. So this and other pressure may have hastened this indictment, although it's difficult to say that this was a hastily put together indictment because it took literally years. So this was not something that was rushed into, although many have questioned whether or not these are the strongest potential charges against Donald Trump, and if the stronger charges might not be those in Georgia, potentially, or from the federal investigation led by special counsel.
Danny Savalas, I'll ask you to stand by as we continue our coverage.